Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Valerie Anne Smith was diagnosed in 1984 at the age of 14 with anorexia nervosa and suffered for a total of 34 years. Initially, from 1984 until 2018, she experienced 4 short periods of being weight restored, but she understood that weight restoration did not equate to healing from her mental illness. Standing at 5'9" tall, her lowest BMI was 11.8, and she spent most of the 34 years weighing 80 pounds. Throughout this period, she faced various complications, including, you ready for this, long list, a lack of a menstrual period for 10 years, anemia, major hair loss, osteoporosis diagnosed through a DEXA scan, a heart murmur, life-threatening complications after a tonsillectomy that required 4 surgeries in 6 days at the age of 31. Goodness. Major triple organ prolapse that necessitated an 8-hour surgery at age 40, OCD, cutting, severe vaginal atrophy, depression, anxiety, 3 stress fractures, and multiple tendon and joint injuries. Finally, she discovered the evidence supporting the importance of protein and saturated fat in healing her brain, which were the exact foods that she had avoided for 33 years. This newfound knowledge marked a massive turning point in her journey. You can find her on Twitter or Instagram at Valerie Anne 1970. Valerie Anne, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Balanced Body Radio.
Thank you, Casey. I'm overjoyed to be here. I'm looking to talk to you.
It's such an honor to host you. So thank you for being here in more ways than one. When we read through all of those things in the introduction, like you could very easily have not been able to be here with us and be here with your family. You mentioned off air that you're best friends with your mom, and that relationship must be absolutely wonderful now that you've been able to find some healing.
Yeah, I'm thankful every day that I survived. I shouldn't have. I really shouldn't have. My weight was so low. The organ problems that I had, the internal problems that I had, the surgeries, and the length of time that I spent at that such of a low weight, I really shouldn't have survived.
Yeah.
Very thankful.
Yeah, so glad you did. We've told some dark stories around here. We've had Michelle Hearn on. She told us about her anorexia and how she found a carnivore diet to help heal that as a registered dietitian. Brett Lloyd, obviously, with deep suicidal depression, fixing his depression by using a carnivore diet. We've had James Lehman on, who you've been on his show. Absolutely love that guy. Leah Keith, former vegan vegetarian for about 20 years, and all the suffering that she still goes through. I would say that your story is probably up there with one of the darkest stories we've told on the show. And so what I want to do is just let's give the ending away. Let's spoiler alert right now. Tell us all that this is a good story with a good ending.
It is. It's a life-changing, transforming story. It is a story that I never thought I was going to have the privilege to tell, because doctors told me that I would be disordered for the rest of my life, that I would never be completely well. And after 4 decades of living it, you always have hope, but after that long and being under traditional treatment and 9 psych meds and hospitalizations and all of the schizoaffective voices that I heard in my head 24 hours a day, I really didn't think that it was possible to actually be free and be healed and be well. I at the very least, when I embarked on this journey with Carnivore, I hope to just be a little better, which was better than anything I ever experienced. So it's a very happy ending, joyful, happy, completely transformative ending.
Yeah, it's not going to feel that way in the next few minutes as we're going to tell your story. And as part of kind of what you said, and we alluded to a little bit in the introduction, there was obviously a lot of physical ailments that you were dealing with, and that must have been absolutely miserable. But when I hear you describe, the voices like you just mentioned, and the mentality, that to me almost sounds like a vastly greater pain than any kind of physical pain. Would you say you agree with that?
It is the mental anguish that goes along with mental illness, and especially if you're hearing audible voices. You can't turn it off. I mean, if you're in physical pain, you can try to comfort yourself. You can try to take pain meds. You can try to deal with the physical pain. But the mental pain that goes on with the schizoaffective voices, you can't turn it off. The only time, 24 hours a day for 35 years, that I escaped it was through sleep. That's the only time it ever went away. It was like, I liken it to when you watch action movies and someone is trying to get information from someone else, and they blare music, or they blare lights, or they blare hard rock music at someone down in a pit, and it goes on for hours and hours and hours, and you see the people in the movie holding their ears and they're trying to get away from it. That's what this feels like. That's what these voices feel like 24 hours a day. And it does not turn off. It does not lower. It doesn't matter what you do, what psych meds you're on, even the ones that say that they're supposed to help audible voices. It just makes you a tired zombie who hears voices.
Yeah.
Nothing helps. Nothing.
Wow. Wow. I think some of us recognize, like, we've got our puppy brains that kind of run around in circles, and that would be fine if it was saying, like, hey, Casey, you're doing really great today. You look awesome. Your hair is great. Like, that never happens to hardly anybody. And it especially to the degree that you were experiencing that. So let's jump in. How did this whole thing start?
Okay. I was clinically diagnosed when I was 14. But before that, even before that, as a younger child, I was very anxious, very people pleasing. I would cry at night thinking that my homework wasn't done perfect enough, or if someone didn't like me. I was diagnosed at 12 with an ulcer. That's how bad my anxiety and my nerves were. I had an estranged relationship with my father, which made me turn a lot of things inward, that there must be something wrong with me, that I was flawed, that I was broken. My parents divorced when I was very, very young, and I felt abandoned. And so that childhood trauma made me have a lot of self-hate. Constantly believing that there was something wrong with me. And so what started out kind of innocent, but kind of not, around age 12 or 13, I began to think that if I lost a little weight, maybe my dad would pay attention to me, maybe boys would pay attention to me, maybe I would get the attention that I felt like I needed, felt like that I wanted. But it quickly turned very, very deadly. It took a hold of me, and within 6 months of time, and I turned into someone that I didn't recognize anymore, emotionally or physically. I was always honest. I was always pleasing people, but throughout this disorder, where I started dieting and started skipping meals, I started lying. I started stealing laxatives. I started being manipulative in order to be isolated and to not eat. So it changed me very quickly. By the time I was 16, my weight had gone down enough for family to notice. I was never what you would consider overweight. Like you said in the intro, I'm 5'9". And I think at 14, 15, I started out as somewhere around 135, 140 pounds. It's a start of adolescence, puberty, things are shifting, the hips are getting bigger, the female womanness is coming out, and sometimes you don't like how that's proportioned at the beginning as a teen, and you feel awkward. So I thought my answer was maybe to lose some weight, even though I wasn't overweight. So by the time I was around 15 or 16, and I had gotten down to about 110 pounds, and I was starting to have problems in the family because they knew by that time that I was skipping meals. It was no longer easy to fool them. It was easy at the beginning. I'd skip breakfast and say, oh, I can't, I'm running late to school. And, innocent kind of things like that you could play off and not be suspected that you're skipping home meals every day, all day long. And I began getting addicted to exercise. I get home from school. I had a single mother who was working full time to try to support us. And so in between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock, I was running myself ragged, up and down the stairs, cardio, running, just trying to run off anything that I possibly could, even though I hadn't eaten anything.
Wow.
It was obsessive, extremely obsessive, and it took hold fast.
Wow.
So by the time I was 16, my family placed me inpatient. By that time, I was around 105 pounds. And it was very clear to see by anybody that something was wrong. The voices had started at this point, and they were screaming at me that I didn't deserve to live, I didn't deserve to eat, that the goal here is to die, that you deserve to die, you don't deserve to have a place here on this earth. Just constant screaming of those messages and those tapes, just dark, evil, awful, 24 hours a day. I felt like I was going insane. I really did, because I didn't understand what was happening. But I was placed inpatient, and the first thing that they do if you're coming in on an eating disorders unit and you're not eating is to place you on a feeding tube, an NG feeding tube. And so that's what was done. And I look back on it now, anorexia treatment in traditional treatment centers has not changed at all since the 38, 39 years since I was inpatient. And what goes in that feeding tube is toxic. It's brain inflaming, anxiety producing toxicity. It's not nutrients. It's 3 ingredients: canola oil, high fructose corn syrup, and soy.
Oh my God.
That's what's put through a feeding tube. And you don't have to be on an anorexia unit to get this. This is what is given to infants primarily in some formulas. This is what's given to toddlers who aren't on the growth chart, and they give them children's Ensure, a bottle to drink. Anybody who goes through surgery or throat issues that needs supplemental nutrition, that's what's put through. In our geriatric wards, in our nursing homes, if our elderly people aren't eating whole foods, they put them on a feeding tube, and that's what's in it. So you start out in an eating disorders unit completely behind the ballpark. They're following the food pyramid guidelines, and they're being paid by food companies, big food, big pharma, and this is where they get their money from. And they think that they call this NG total nutrition. There's no nutrition in that. It just makes you worse.
It's crazy to think you've got a mental disorder going on. They're trying to put weight on you, and that's a priority, but they're not trying to fix the mental disorder. It's like a disaster fire. You're just throwing extra cans of gasoline on with all these pro-inflammatory ingredients. It's madness. And you said none of that has really changed. If I were to go into an anorexia clinic today, that would still be the case.
Correct. I have firsthand experience with that. I have several families that I'm counseling, not including the adults that I counsel that reach out to me on Twitter and Instagram, but I have several families in my community who have teenage children who have been in the eating disorders unit within the last 6 months, and I've gone to visit them during the 5 feeding times when this is put through their feeding tube. I saw it. This is what is still being pushed through the feeding tube. And it's not about nutrition. It's not about, nothing has changed in the protocol of how this is approached in the hospital. The nutritionists, the dietitians, the nurses, the doctors, psychiatrists all believe that the mental illness goes away when we weight restore you. If we get enough weight on you, this will go away and you will be well. And that's not what happens.
That sounds absurd.
It's not what happens. And when you get taken off the feeding tube and you're expected to eat the tray of food that then comes 3 times a day plus 3 snacks that's delivered from the hospital cafeteria, you're expected to eat it all. And there's hardly any, if any, protein. A lot of the hospitals in my area are from the Seventh-day Adventist type church. And so there's definitely absolutely no red meat. There may be a little bit of boiled chicken once in a while, but most of it is plant-based, and most of it is packaged muffins, pancakes, cake, pies, pudding, and the whole treatment behind this is that if you can prove to us that you can eat these things that you fear, the pies, the cakes, the muffins, the pancakes, if you can eat those things, we'll say you're well and let you go home. And so all the while, nothing is being repaired. Nothing is going into your system that's actually healing your brain so that you can think clearly, so that the brain fog goes away, so that the depression goes away, the anxiety goes away. They just pump you full of more sugar and carbs. And when you get to a certain weight that they feel that you're not in a danger zone anymore, they send you home with a meal plan that's the same as what they fed you in the hospital. And you have to follow, or supposed to follow, that meal plan.
Of course it's not going to happen. You just added weight. You still feel terrible, and you weigh extra. Like, of course
Right.
You're going to relapse. How did they not see that coming? Like,
and that's the only thing that they have. They don't have anything else in their arsenal because they don't want to acknowledge that food, actual real food, has any bearing on your mental health. They believe that all food is the same, and that it neither helps nor harms. It's just a weight restoration, and they don't equate any one certain group of food as helping.
That's crazy.
It's infuriating.
Wow. And so, okay, so you're in the inpatient. They send you home. Yeah. How long? I mean, obviously you relapse. How long does it take before you relapse? It sounds like that would, like, day one, it would already start, having the wheels come off.
Day one, exactly. Day one.
Wow.
Because nothing has changed. Nothing in my brain was changed. I went into the hospital trying to die, trying to starve, trying to restrict, listening to these voices screaming at me, don't know how to escape, looking in the mirror and being plagued by body dysmorphia and seeing someone who's terribly overweight. And 6 weeks later, they released me from the hospital, 10 pounds heavier. Same thing. Body dysmorphia is there. Voices are screaming at me. Can't wait to restrict and try to figure out how to skip meals and fool my family. And it just starts all over again. The only thing it did was keep me alive. It didn't do any, there was no improvement whatsoever. None.
Wow.
None.
Yeah, that's stunning. How were you able eventually to start a relationship? That must have been incredibly challenging.
It was. And at that point, when I was inpatient, I was 16. I did not meet my future husband until I was 22. So in between there, between 14 and 22, the relationships that I did have in school were either very unhealthy and very toxic, or I avoided it altogether. I just didn't want anybody around me. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't want anybody around me. I just wanted to be left alone to starve.
Yeah, that's terribly sad. Wow. Okay. So did we miss anything physically that happened in the time in between, turning 16, inpatient, and meeting your husband eventually? Were there other things kind of jumping off the cliff at that point, or was that later on?
Most of it happened later on, after I'd had decades of starvation. The one thing that did happen there between 14, 16, and 22 is I lost my menstrual period, of course, because I was teetering right around 100 pounds. And so that was the first thing. And towards the end of that period, I was told by doctors that I don't expect to be able to have children, that you cut this off when puberty started, and there's no way for us to know if you ever get your menstrual period back, if you will ovulate, if you will be able to get pregnant, carry a child to term. They told me that it probably would never happen. Thankfully, I was able to. But
how were you able to?
Well, when I met my husband, he was the first man in my life that I felt unconditionally loved by. And that love that he showed me helped me to try, with the limited knowledge that I had, that helped me to try to eat more and put weight on so that we could try to have children. So when I turned 24 and we got married, I was slowly putting weight on, but of course, I still didn't know the importance of protein and fat. I was putting weight on by eating bread and toast and spaghetti and pancakes and a lot of pasta. It was all through carbs. So I still wasn't any better mentally at all. But I put enough weight on for my period to come back, and then we began to try to see if I could conceive. And two miracles of being able to have both of my daughters almost 7 years apart. But I was able to have a normal pregnancy, normal in terms of she was healthy and not underweight, but not normal in the sense of what I experienced physically and emotionally. I spent a lot of the pregnancy very, very ill physically. And these are the times when I can explain to people that completely factual, that weight restoration doesn't heal anything. It doesn't heal that mental illness, because both pregnancies that I experienced, I was not only of normal weight, but I was gaining a lot. I wasn't restricting myself in order to keep my weight low. I did that. My priority was my unborn child. I mean, I already had a history of self-harm. I already had a history of loathing myself, but it was easy to love the child that was within me growing.
Yeah.
So I put all of my effort into that. And I weighed quite a bit when both of my daughters were born. I was up to around 170, 180 pounds.
Oh,
so
wow.
I had gained 40 to 50 pounds with both of them. So they were very healthy, of healthy weight. Both of them were almost 9 pounds. And but the mental illness got worse during this time because I wasn't actively in starvation. I was hoping that the doctors were right, that the more weight I put on and the more that I was not starving, that this would go away, that the mental illness and the anorexia would actually eventually go away with enough time. And it just got worse. When I wouldn't listen to the voices to starve, two things started that was never on my radar, that I never thought that I would be plagued with. And that's when I started cutting, and that's when I started hair pulling. The hair pulling has a long scientific name. It's called trichotillomania. And I was pulling hair out of my scalp, my eyelashes, my eyebrows, and the cutting I was doing on my arms and my legs. And it was a very embarrassing, dark, shameful time at the time. I'm not embarrassed about it or ashamed about it now, but it was then. And so in order to kind of pass out in public, I was using a lot of products to try to cover up what I was doing at home to cope with not self-starving. So I was using women's foundation liquid makeup on my legs and letting it dry, and on my arms to try to cover up the wounds. And I was doing, makeup on my eyebrows to make it look like I had eyebrows. It took me hours to strategically put my hair up in certain ways to cover whole bald spots that were probably 2 or 3 inches in diameter. And fake eyelashes. And I would go to bed every night self-loathing about that you have control over your hands. You know, you can get up in the morning and choose to not do this. You have control over whether you cut yourself or whether you pull your hair out. This is crazy. You don't have to do this. But I was compelled to. I could not stop. I literally could not stop. I would get up in the morning and say, okay, it's a new day. I'm not going to do this. And I would find myself by bedtime that night. It would just all over again.
This is the part of the conversation I was absolutely not looking forward to. This sounds terrible. And I was going to ask, like, when you're, I don't know what you're cutting yourself with. Maybe you could describe a little bit of that if it's not too painful to revisit, but like, are you thinking and planning, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this in a half hour, I'm going to cut my arm right here? Or is it almost like, sounds like a twitch or something where it's just like, you get the urge and it just happens before you can do anything about it? Is that closer to what it feels like?
Sometimes it was both. Sometimes the stress would build over the course of a day so much. The drive to starve was so strong that I actually would plan the cutting late at night whenever, you know, when my husband was in bed and I was in the bathroom by myself. And the only way I can describe it is when you take a small blade or a knife or tweezers or that and I know it's going to sound crazy, but there's a release. There is a calming release that happens when you cut and you see a trickle of blood come out of that cut. I know it's awful. It is. It really is. And like I said, I was very ashamed of it then. I'm not ashamed of it now because I know that there are millions, at least thousands, probably millions, that do this, and they don't have anybody to talk to about it. But sometimes it was spontaneous. Sometimes it was I'd be shaving my legs and in the shower and come out and realize that I had nicked something on my leg, and I would let it clot over. And then the next night getting in the shower, I would see the scab there. And instead of leaving it alone, that's all I could think about was pulling that scab off and seeing the wound open. And for that brief second, the voice would, I shouldn't say quiet because it didn't quiet. It would tell me that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, because this was the alternative to starving.
Wow.
That this is what I deserved.
If you're listening and not watching, you are not seeing me squirm all over the place in uncomfortableness. So grateful that you've wanted to talk about this, because of the people that are probably still suffering out there. It must be incredibly challenging for you to revisit that time in your life, but to be able to want to do it, to share the message, my heart goes out. It's really very uncomfortable.
Well, and I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. And I know that they are out there and they don't know how to stop, because you can't force yourself to stop. You really can't. And as soon as each of my daughters were born, then those two elements, the cutting and the hair pulling, would subside, and the self-starvation would rear its ugly head again. And this balance of, when I was doing one, these two would slow a little bit, and when I was trying to eat more and not starve, then those two would take precedence. And it was a nightmare. It was a torturous nightmare. And I was under care all of this time. I went through at least a dozen psychiatrists, some who just couldn't help, some who basically fired me and told me not to come back because I either yes.
What?
Yes. If I wasn't going to sign a contract that I was going to gain 3 pounds a week, he looked at me and said, "Don't come back." you're
That's not in your control. You don't have control over
you're
that.
non-compliant. You're a non-compliant, treatment resistant client, and I don't want you to come back. That happened at least 3 times. And the psychiatrist that did keep me around for a year or two, they put me on, all different meds. I've been on 9 or 10 different psych meds, which none of them help. They all just cause a bunch of side effects. And I eventually, on my own, 10 years, so it'd be 15 years ago, because I healed 5 years ago. So 15 years ago, went off of the ones that I was still on because they weren't helping. They just made me either sedated, and I was already not the mom I was wanting to be because of all of this. And you throw in being asleep all the time or feeling like a zombie all the time.
Yeah.
I was less functioning on the meds than I was off the meds. So, I went off of them. I titrated myself off of them on my own about 15 years ago, so I could at least be somewhat awake when my daughters were growing up, as hard as it was anyway. I wasn't functioning, but I was more functioning off the meds.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was in a hole somewhere and I wasn't seeking help. I went to see dietitians, nutritionists. I was under the care of primary care physicians and psychiatrists, and I was under treatment all this time, but there was no help. And
yeah. And it wasn't like your husband is shoving you into these places. It's you're walking in willingly,
yes,
seeking it out.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't against my will. I wanted this to end. And even though I was actively starving and was secretly liking my body and the low weight that it was at, because that's just part of anorexia. I wanted to be well. I wanted help. I wasn't kicking and screaming, refusing to get better. I just couldn't get better. I just couldn't. No matter what weight I was, no matter what my motivation was, no matter what kind of physical complication I had after that, as I was getting older and I had things go wrong and I had surgeries and I had all kinds of injuries and illnesses, someone who is of sound mind would take all of those things as a wake-up call and say, it's time to change some things so that I don't have that road to go down anymore. When you're mentally ill, it doesn't matter what happens to you physically. The driver is still there.
Yeah.
You can't stop.
Yeah. And having the message instilled inside of you that you had to be a certain weight for everything to correct would keep you chasing your tail, trying to get all these different weights like you're talking about to see, like, well, is this weight when I'm supposed to feel better? Is this the weight that the voices stop? Like, you'd be running after the wrong thing.
Exactly. I can remember going into the hospital in labor with both of my daughters at 180 pounds. And all I could think about was, after they're born and I nurse them for a time, I can't wait to stop eating again. So the weight doesn't have anything to do. Of course, the weight is important. I shouldn't be here at, down to 79 pounds and the BMI that it was. Weight is important, but in mental illness, it's secondary.
Yeah.
In order for it to be permanent, because I gained and relapsed and gained and relapsed 4 times in the course of 35 years. So that's not the answer.
Yeah. Wow. Well, okay. So we've talked about some of the physical things that were going on. We mentioned a lot of them in the introduction. You just mentioned some. What were some of the most debilitating as far as the physical degeneration that you were experiencing?
Okay. The osteoporosis and the joint injuries, the bone pain, that was difficult. I had more fractures than what I listed on there. I think I said 3, but I actually had 5 fractures in 5 years. I was constantly in pain. I was always on crutches, always had braces on, wrists, ankles, knees. And I couldn't get out from under the injuries. And at the time, I knew it was from malnutrition, but of course I couldn't do anything about it. And I was also over exercising. So that was painful. That was debilitating. And because of my malnutrition, because of my emaciation, what would normally take 4 or 6 weeks for a stress fracture to heal took me 12. So I was on the couch a lot. I was bedridden a lot. I was always on crutches. Those injuries were difficult, and as difficult and long-term as that was, what went wrong in 2009, 2010 was actually even worse. So in 2010, I was 40. And so that at that point, this had been going on for 25 years. And I began to have terrible internal problems. I wasn't going to the bathroom right. And I began to have pain and a fullness feeling in my lower abdomen, and I knew something was wrong. And I tried to ignore it for as long as I could. And then when my colon prolapsed outside my body, then there was no denying that I needed to go get help. So I had to go see 3 different specialists to diagnose all of the organs that had prolapsed. And the reason that this happened was I spent so many years being so skeletal. I not only had no fat or muscle visible on the outside, I had lost all musculature internally. I could not hold organs in place. So my uterus, my bladder, and my colon all prolapsed at the same time.
Oh my God.
And so there was time there where they had to get several surgeons on the schedule together. They couldn't just rush me in for emergency surgery. So I spent about 6 or 8 weeks at home dealing with this while they were trying to coordinate surgeons together, because it needed to be all at the same time in the same operating room on a 9-hour surgery, where one doctor would come in and do what they were going to do while I was opened up, and the next doctor would come in. So I needed a colon specialist. I needed a urinary tract specialist, and I needed a gynecological specialist, all surgeons who could go in through the same incisions that were made and either remove, repair, tack in place, everything that they needed to do to try to fix me. And on top of that, I'm allergic to all opiates. And so there was no pain relief. There was nothing that they could give me for pain. And part of what goes into anesthesia to put you to sleep for the operation is usually partially sedative and partially pain relief of opiates. They combine those. And since they couldn't put the opiate in there with it, I woke up in the middle of surgery. And
oh God.
It was devastating. It was devastating. And they quickly got me put back under and, restrained my arms it was devastating. So what
It's
had
like
to,
your most sensitive part of your body. Like,
yeah, it
oh
was,
my,
yeah, it was devastating. And of course, my family didn't know until after the surgery was over and I was in recovery and actually fully awake that I had to tell them I woke up during surgery. And the look on the surgeon's faces above me, I'll never forget the shock and how desperately they quickly, got me to try to figure out how to put me back under. Yeah, I'll never forget that. And so, and waking up in pain, they tried to find things for me to take, but no one's really come up with anything really good apart from the whole opiate family. There's 14 or 15 different opiates, and they were not convinced that I was allergic to all of them. Well, you haven't never had this one. We'll try this one.
ugh.
Yeah, and that was devastating too, because they quickly understood that no, I'm allergic to that one too. So then they had to pump Benadryl through my IV to calm the devastating allergic reaction that I get when I have opiates in my system. So what had to happen was they had to remove 18 inches of my colon and reattach it and suture it to my tailbone internally, because there was nothing to suture it to. There was no muscle to attach it to. And my uterus had to be completely removed. I made sure that I kept my ovaries so that I would still have a source of natural hormones in my system.
Yeah.
And they did the best that they could with my bladder by trying to tack it back in place. They had to use a lot of mesh internally to try to tack it back in place, because again, there was nowhere to put it. There was nothing to attach it to because I didn't have any muscle inside.
Valerie Anne, like you couldn't make this into a movie if you wanted to. Nobody would believe it. Like,
I know.
this is crazy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Wow.
It was very devastating, and it took a long time to recover from that. Physically.
Wow.
It was hard.
Wow. Are we getting close to the good news?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, that's next.
Oh my goodness.
So I recovered from that surgery and went, a few more years. I had some more complications in there because my hormones were so low. They diagnosed me, the gynecologist diagnosed me as having vaginal atrophy, a condition called vulvodynia. I had extreme female pain, and they told me that there was no cause, that this would be this way for the rest of my life, and they could try to help the symptoms of the pain and the burning that I experienced all the time with estrogen cream. And I tried to do the best I could by making sure it was natural, bioidentical, compounded pharmacy, but it didn't heal anything. I know now, part of my, happiness part that we're going to get to, I know now how it can be, but I think of the millions of women out there that have those diagnoses and they live the rest of their lives on estrogen cream and never really heal anything. It might take some of the symptoms away, but I'm here to tell it now that what those women need, I guarantee you, if they're on it and they have those two conditions that I had, I guarantee it, they're following a low-fat, no-protein diet.
Yep.
And if they turn that around, if they flood their system with protein and saturated fat, it will heal. I was on this estrogen cream for 6 years with no, and if I didn't use it every day, I was in pain again.
Wow.
And I have not used it in 5 years. it's completely gone. It's completely healed.
Wow.
So the healing part of this is around 2016, I was back down to 79 pounds again. And I had basically lost most hope. In order to go to the bathroom, I was taking doses and doses of Miralax every day. My doctors told me it was safe. I didn't like how I felt on it. I had a lot of bloating, but it was the only way I could go to the bathroom. I hated being on it. I know now that I was poisoning myself because it's stupid ethylene. It's a petroleum byproduct. And I've got, when you go keto, you go carnivore, that part of your journey where you're starting, you question everything you put in your mouth. You start to question everything you're ingesting, everything that's in your environment. You're looking for, oh, that's toxic. Why was I taking that? Oh, that's toxic. Why was I taking that? I was doing the same thing, with the Miralax. I discovered the same thing about the gas pills I was taking. In order to mitigate the severe IBS that I had and the vegetables that I was eating, because that's all I was eating was vegetables, I was taking 4 gas pills every single day in my vitamin containers. I mean, it wasn't even just take it when you need it. I was taking them 4 times a day, and doctors said, oh, it's safe. It's just simethicone. Well, I didn't bother to look up, well, what's simethicone? Well, I have done that now. I did that 5 years ago and discovered that it's siloxane, polydimethyl siloxane. It's the same ingredient in silly putty and breast implants.
Oh my goodness.
Now, would you swallow silly putty and breast implants? No.
Probably not.
No, but I was swallowing 4 gas pills every day for 15 years. So, like I said, our journeys into this nutrition, we start questioning everything, that we take. So in 2016, 17, I didn't have much hope. I was 79, 80 pounds again. That's all I was eating was celery and green beans and spinach. Small amounts, like maybe 100 to 300 calories a day.
Wow.
That's it. And I can't describe to you how cold I was. It could be the middle of summer, 90 degrees, and I've got long pants, a long shirt, a jacket on, and I'm cooking the celery to make it as hot as I possibly can so that I can put something in my stomach to warm me from the inside out. That's all I drank was hot water, hot tea, hot coffee, trying to warm up. It's a coldness that chills you to the bone. It's painful to be that small. From all of these years, I knew that it couldn't be about weight. I knew that. So I started reading books and about what the brain needs. I already knew, I was anxious. I had severe OCD. I already knew I was suffering from debilitating clinical depression. So I started researching, is there anything? And for me, at that point, it wasn't food, it was supplements. Are there more supplements that I can take, that I can swallow, that will help my brain? And that's when I started learning about the different neurotransmitters in our brain, GABA and dopamine and serotonin, and how important those are for anything to get better, for any kind of depression, anxiety to get better. So I read some books on that, and that was about the same time that we got our first smart TV, and I learned about YouTube. And so I began to search for any kind of TED Talk or any kind of podcast that might have to do with healing the brain. And that's when I found Dr. Chris Palmer and Dr. Georgia E. and Nina Teicholz, big doctors like that had whole 40 minutes that I could listen to of how important the brain chemistry was, and that nothing else would heal if your brain wasn't well. I still wasn't implementing food, but I was learning, and I was researching every single day of what I could do. And I ordered some supplements to help those. I ordered GABA, I ordered 5-HTP, which is the precursor to serotonin. I went on magnesium to help with anxiety. I did what I could at the time that I could do it. And then there were several videos in there that they started talking about the food components, that supplements are okay, but you can't really heal anything permanently or really flood your brain with what it needs unless you're consuming whole foods. And that's when I found Dr. Ken Berry and Dr. Sean Baker, and I decided to try one last time. And because of the starvation, and this is why I disclaimer the people that I counsel and the people that I help, that so many people can switch from one diet to another, and they can see improvement in their mental health fairly quickly. Within a matter of days or weeks, they can feel, hey, I'm less anxious and my brain fog is lifting, because they were already consuming enough calories of carbs and whatever that they could switch to that same volume of food with protein and fat and some vegetables. Well, I couldn't do that. I hadn't eaten any meat and definitely no fat for 35 years.
Yeah.
So I started where I had to. I literally could not do more than what I did. So I promised myself that I would give this the best try that I could. And I started with fat-free chicken. I don't hardly ever eat chicken anymore, but that was where I had to start. And the amount was 1 ounce, 2 tablespoons. And that first week that I did that, 1 ounce every day, I sat at the kitchen table and I just wept. The voices screamed at me to stop, that I was going to get fat, that you can't eat this, that you're worthless, that you're nothing, that you just need to go kill yourself. This is never going to go away. You're never going to get better. But I kept on. And I promised myself that when I got used to that ounce, that I would double it. So every week and a half, I tried to put myself on a schedule that as soon as I got used to that, then I ate 2 ounces of chicken, and then 3, and then 4. And when I got to about 8 ounces of chicken, that was when I was really watching a lot of Ken Berry's videos about what king of nutrition is in beef. And so I attempted to switch from the chicken to 96% fat-free ground beef. And I was able to do it. It seems crazy now of what I had to do, but that was all I could do. So I switched over to the 8 ounces of ground beef. And I did that for 6 months. I was eating a half a pound of ground beef every day for 6 months. And at the 6-month mark, things were changing. I could tell. I was now not only looking forward to eating that and that it tasted good, but about 20 minutes into eating that, there was an actual calm that would come over me that I'd never experienced before. And some of the OCD was lessening. Some of the anxiety was lessening. Part of my OCD was counting things, checking things, body checking, cracking my knuckles a certain amount of times. I had to do that. That subsided on its own without me forcing myself to try to walk away from it. And that's what was so different. Before, when I knew these habits were bad, I would try to force myself to stop, and I couldn't. This was different. I didn't need to do it anymore. And so that was encouraging. So at that 6-month mark, I stopped the chicken and the ground beef, and I bought chuck roasts and put it in the crock pot because I had done more reading about how much more these whole cuts of meat with the collagen and the connective tissue. And so I switched that out, and I was able to do that. And at the 9-month mark, 9 months in, I had gotten up to about 3/4 of a pound of red meat a day. And the screaming voices that were so loud and so incessant, they were still there. But the way I describe it is that they were now in another room with the door closed. And I'm like, what is this? That, you know, I've never had a reduction. I've never had a fading or a lessening in 35 years, in my entire, you know, most of my life. And so I knew I was on to something. I knew, you know, and even if I never got any better, I at least had that. I at least had some lessening of some of my symptoms. This was the same time at that 9-month mark that I was able to look at myself in the mirror for the first time and see what I actually looked like. The body dysmorphia went away. And I was appalled at what I looked like. And this was also the time frame that I stopped the cutting, stopped the hair pulling. And it wasn't something that I forced myself to do. I was able to look at those habits and say, Valerie, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I was able to just walk away and say, this is not serving me anymore. I don't need this anymore. I don't have to do this anymore. And at that 9-month mark, I walked away from that, and I've never done it again. And I've never felt the need to.
Wow.
So at that point, I decided, okay, something, you know, this is healing me. And I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm not doing adding an ounce anymore. I'm gonna eat till I'm full. I'm just gonna eat till I'm full. I don't care anymore. You know, how many calories it is, how many, whatever it is, I don't care anymore. I'm starting to feel good, and that's what I'm going towards. I'm chasing my freedom now. So by the time I hit the 1-year mark, from January of 2018 to January 2019, that Christmas, that last Christmas before I hit the 1-year mark, that was the best Christmas I've now since had even better ones, but that Christmas was awesome. I became a person that was joyful and happy and just overflowed with energy right at that 1-year mark. And within a couple of months at that 1-year mark, everything else left. Everything. The voice that was in another room with the door closed was gone. Completely gone. I'd never known that. Because wow. even as a young child, before the mental illness and before the anorexia took hold, I still had the self-loathing. I still had messages that I sent myself internally, and that was all gone also. I was liking who I was becoming, and I was free. For the first time in my entire life, I was free, and the joy just overflowed. I had some worries at that point that this was too good to be true, that I would wake up and the rug would be pulled out from under me and it would be back, that this can't be permanent. How can this possibly be permanent? And day in and day out, over the course of maybe 3 or 4 months, I finally relaxed. I finally said, I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore and worry that I'm going to wake up in the morning and it's going to be back. It's not. It's completely gone. And I've just continued to improve, continued to heal so many other things physically, learn so many things about myself. That was when I learned how damaging vegetables were to me. I know there's plenty of people out there that absolutely love vegetables, and I do love them. Man, I could sit down and eat a bowl of coleslaw and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and I actually love them, but I had to give them up. My IBS, being strict carnivore the first 2 years, helped me to see how good I really could feel. And I finally said, when I would try to implement things back in again and add things back in, I finally said to myself, it's not worth that. It's not worth to be, because it wasn't just a discomfort for half an hour. And, I'd be in pain for 24 hours.
Wow.
And of course, then be wanting to reach for those gas pills. And I wasn't going to do that. So I kind of had to walk away. But I also learned that I could eat some fruit with no problem. And I know there are plenty of people out there that can do vegetables just fine, but they cannot do any fruit, whether it be sugar addiction, cravings, whatever drives them to the next thought after they eat a few blueberries. But for me, I don't have that issue. So, I can eat my second meal and be completely full of another 1.5 pounds of meat and eat a bowl of blueberries or melon that's in season, and it doesn't lead anywhere else. I can enjoy that, and it doesn't, just as part of variety to my 99% meat diet, and it doesn't trigger anything for me. So I'm thankful for that. If I had to give up vegetables, I can at least eat a few blueberries.
Oh, that's great. Well, Valerie Anne, I've got news for you. You didn't cure anything. All you did was trade one eating disorder for another eating disorder. You are limiting foods. You are completely restricting foods. The last thing we tell everybody, like we said earlier, like you were talking about, is that is another form of an eating disorder. What do you want to say to that?
Okay. That's one of the reasons why I collaborated with Nick Norowitz and Dr. Brett Scher to be involved in the case series. I was patient number 3 under the pseudonym.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons that drove me to do the work and the documentation to be a part of that, was to dispel that lie.
I did not know that. That's so cool.
So I had to stay quiet about it for a long time before it was entered into the Journal of Insulin Resistance. But when Nick, was able to announce it when it was entered, I knew all along that I was going to reveal myself. I knew all along, because I knew that there were people that were going to be very contrary. They were going to be very hateful and bullish and come at Nick and the anonymous patients and say that there's no way that you can heal by one eating disorder with another. So I knew I was going to reveal myself and say, hey, here I am. You want to talk? Bring it on. Bring it on. Okay. Restriction. This is not restriction. Restriction is being bedridden. Restriction is schizoaffective voices screaming at you that that you can't even go out to eat with your husband. And when you do force yourself to go out to eat with your family or your husband, that's all you can order is plain lettuce and sit there and eat lettuce. Oh yeah, that's a grand time of being, and that's all you want to do is go home and hide, because you can't relax, you can't smile because you're so depressed. The voices are screaming at you. That's restriction. Restriction is the fractures that I constantly had. That actually restricts your life. That physically restricts you. And the mental illness that I had mentally restricts you. Eating this way is my freedom. There is no restriction in choosing the foods that make you feel your best. That's what I do every day. I don't measure anything. I don't count anything. I don't limit anything. I eat the foods that I crave and that I love that brought me this healing. And there is no restriction in that freedom. There is none. I enjoy absolutely everything that I eat. I don't sit and wish and long for bread or bagels or carbs. I'm so completely satiated and over the top joyful after a pound and a pound and a half of beef at my first meal and another pound and a half at my second meal, whether it be more beef or beautiful salmon or cod or some sort of pork roast. It completely fills me and satiates me and completes me physically and mentally, that there is no restriction. I have a life that I never had before. And if the haters want to call it a restrictive way of eating, after I've explained myself, they can. I mean, if you want to argue about it, everybody restricts something. I mean, if you stop smoking, you've restricted your smoking. If you stop drinking, you've restricted your drinking. I mean, but you don't tell those people that they're disordered. You don't tell them that. This has given me a life that I have never ever known. This has given me a way to be a mom and a wife and a daughter that is truly complete, that is making new memories with my family, with my husband. For example, going out to eat with my husband, he stopped asking for years. We've been together for 32 years. And I wish all that time that I could give him what he wanted, what would have been a nice time out for us. But he knew how torturous it was for me, that I didn't enjoy it. I sat there with a bowl of plain lettuce or argued with the waitress that my broccoli wasn't plain, that there had to be garlic or had to be butter on it, and it had to be plain and had to be steamed. That's not an enjoyable evening out with your husband.
You consumed some spit from a few chefs, I'm guessing. I'm sure they were not too happy with your orders.
Exactly. And I couldn't turn it off. There was nothing I could do about it. And so I began to just not go out anymore. It was just too hard. It wasn't fun. It wasn't enjoyable. It wasn't relaxing. And now for the past 5 years, it is so much fun. We'll find a steakhouse. I'll order the biggest steak, and or we'll go to where my daughter is a server, and I'll get several burger patties, big old half-pound burger patties. We'll sit there across from each other. I'm completely relaxed. I'm completely animated, happy, joyful, engaged with what we're talking about. It's a brand new life. It's like just getting married, even though we've been together for 32 years. We're starting over, and it's just, everything is new. Everything was like in black and white, and now it's color. Everything takes on new meaning. I used to look at a sunset or a sunrise and just feel sadness, just feel darkness. There was nothing there. And now I look at those wonders of creation, or standing on the beach in Siesta Key with my mom and watching the ocean and watching the dolphins. And I can't wait to get in there and swim for 4 hours, and lay out in the sun, that I never could do before, because I not only didn't have the energy, but who wants to see what I looked like on a beach in a swimsuit? Everything is brand new.
Wow.
I have my first grandchild due. My daughter is pregnant with her first child.
Wow.
And I can't imagine. She's 7 months pregnant. And I can't imagine my former self being able to enjoy how I'm enjoying it now. I wouldn't have been able to be the mom to her and the friend to her that we are with each other now, and actually enjoy each other and be excited over what's happening in her life. It just wouldn't be there. And the other alternative is that I didn't make it.
That's right.
That I passed away. Anorexia has the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric illnesses.
Yeah.
20%, 1 in 5 die. And they die from one of 3 reasons. It's either starvation, organ failure, or suicide.
That's right.
And I'm so thankful and so grateful to not only still be here, but to be on the other side and be completely, utterly, 100% well and healed. I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. And that's when I knew that I needed to get involved. I'd never been on social media before, but I knew that the current treatment that's out there does not help. And the only way that we can help each other is to tell our story, and to keep telling it, and to keep telling truth, and to get into heated debate with those that say that this can't happen. Because along the way, even bad press is still press.
Right.
Even when someone argues with you, it still highlights the message that I'm trying to send out. And someone else may see that exchange on Twitter or on Instagram and be curious. So even when someone comes at me and argues with me, someone else might be out there reading it. Someone else might be out there watching it. And I always say, reach out to me. I'll give you my phone number. We'll talk on the phone. I have about a dozen right now that I'm talking to through text, through phone calls, and they're all different, reasons. It could be mental health. It could be anorexia. It could be just straight carnivore, helping them on their journey to get started and help them with their macros, and helping them, especially if they're women and they're under eating. So many women under eat and they're not getting enough protein. And I'm a big advocate of you need to eat all the protein that you need to in more pounds than what you weigh in order to have enough extra to build muscle and to actually repair what's going on in your body, and especially your brain. There has to be extra. You can't just eat the bare minimum to just survive. This life is not about surviving. This life is about thriving and being in optimal health and being able to live a joyful life. So I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. And if I can help even one person, I'm all in, just.
That's amazing. Wow, that's amazing. Speaking of Dr. Norwitz, one of the episodes I've done with him, we did with Dr. Chris Palmer, and we also brought Brett Lloyd on the show. Again, you're very familiar with.
Yes, and I watched that. Yep.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And Dr. Chris Palmer, he made some fair points. He got some pushback from Nick and I, but he was saying the ketogenic diet is very, very hard. It's difficult for people to do. Some people don't have the education. Some people can't afford it. And again, Nick and I were agreeing with him, but also saying, you know what, it's really not all that hard. And they asked Brett the same thing, if it was hard for him. And he answered almost exactly the same way. It is not restrictive to not feel depression and suicidality every single day. It is worth eating burger patties and bacon, which are absolutely delicious, and experiencing joy and appreciating the time with his wife and the time on the beach, like you mentioned. It's such a game changer. It's such an important message. The story, I'm so glad, ended on a good note, and a very, very, very good note. Again, to have the courage to go through some of that stuff with us today, hats off to you. What a wonderful and very nearly tragic story, and that you're out there sharing your message now is absolutely wonderful. I hope this episode gets out to tons of people. Where do you want people to go to find you and connect with you and your work? So if they need some help, they can find some answers.
Okay. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and they're both the same handle, both Valerie Anne 1970. And Valerie Anne is spelled VALERIEANNE. the E on the end, and the year 1970, which is the year I was born. So both of those platforms, you can direct message me, you can comment. You know, if you don't want to direct message me and you just want to comment and reach out to me, I'll direct message you. And I like to talk to people in real time. I mean, there's some basic questions that you can answer through a direct message, but if you're talking about mental health, you're talking about macros, you're talking about protein, and you want to be able to have a back and forth conversation about, okay, tell me what you're eating right now. Give me a couple of days typical of what you're eating so that I can start to gauge and start to get a picture of what we need to change in order for you to feel better. So I give out my phone number, and we all set up a time to talk on the phone. We'll text back and forth and say what's good for you, and I'll say what's good for me. And we'll carve out a time as quick as I can to talk for an hour or two on the phone. And let's just talk about it all. And I'll sit with a notebook and I'll write it down, and I'll get back with them. And it's not a one and done. I don't talk to you for once and then you're on your own. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not going anywhere. I have people that contacted me back in March when I first stepped out on Twitter and said this can be healed. I'm still talking to those people today. I'm still checking on them if I haven't heard from them in a couple of months, or they just randomly text me or call me or message me on Instagram and Twitter and say, I'm just checking in. This is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm doing, or I'm having this problem. What do you recommend? And I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying put.
That is absolutely amazing. I can tell just how absolutely passionate you are. When we offer our 30-minute consultations online, I always prefer to talk to somebody as well. And very often it drifts from 30 minutes to an hour. And I always tell people, like, look, this is our coaching call or whatever, but message me, let me know how things are going. And to have that support from somebody who's been on the other side must be so wonderful for people. You are an absolute saint, Valerie Anne Smith. Thank you so very much again for all the suffering you went through, to be able to come out of it on the other side and be willing to learn how to use Instagram, if nothing else. Like, oh my goodness.
At 53.
It's so inspiring and amazing, and yeah, I've kind of been on the edge of tears this entire chat. So thank you so very much for everything you've done, and thank you for taking the time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I'm just over the moon because I've watched almost every single podcast that you've put out. And my dream when you contacted me, I walked around the house holding my phone saying, Dwight, my husband, guess who just messaged me?
Oh, jeez. Now I'm blushing.
I was over the moon.
Well, thank you for the kind words. And it really was such an honor to host you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.